Okay, so I have Alx Preston, the head of a little studio called Heart Machine. And if you've ever played Hyperlight Drifter or Solar Ash, you are very well aware of Alex's work and the work of his team out in LA. And now because of COVID, if you guys are now on the No Clip series talking about the development of Hyperlight Breaker, and have learned it's now a worldwide team as well with COVID, correct?
It's true. Yeah, we have folks, here in the U.S. and Canada and different parts of Europe and in the UK, and so we've really branched out globally at this point.
So one of the things I want to do is I wanted to make sure when we've reached out to get people involved in the games, I've been able to dive into both Hyperlight Drifter and Solar Ash. Want to start with your first release, Hyperlight Drifter, which started off as a Kickstarter. One of the most unique games I would say that I've ever played, everywhere from the art direction to how you told the story. So when you envisioned this, what was the overall concept that you wanted to have with Hyperlight Drifter?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while, and I've talked about it so many times, but then sometimes you forget about it for a little bit, but because we're so busy on many different aspects. But Drifter, Drifter was my first game that I really actually finished. I'd certainly tried to make other things with other folks and by myself at different times, but that was the first thing that was the first game project that was like done. And the goal there, not just, hey, make a video game, was to be more expressive about my own kind of personal challenges that I deal with on the health side, and kind of, whether it be physical or mental health issues, and speak to that, because I feel like if you go through some really challenging things in life and you don't speak to them in some fashion or another, especially if you are a creative person, that's it's therapeutic in some sense. It becomes an outlet, and you hope that it resonates with people at the end of the day, but mostly it's about trying to get stuff out that you want to get out. And otherwise, if you don't, it gets too congested and can really, if you internalize that stuff for too long, that creates its own problems. That boiling, simmering set of fear and frustration and anger and all these things that you got to put it somewhere. And what better way than something creative that other people could experience and maybe connect with you on.
Yeah, and to kind of dig into that a little bit deeper, because it's something I became aware with in playing the games, doing some research about you and Heart Machine, and also watching the No Clip documentary that's out now, is that you specifically deal with chronic health problems as well. So, and it feels like when you're playing through it, the Drifter character is almost reflecting you in that way. Was that kind of, you're saying you're trying to cope and find an outlet to deal with it. So do you feel like you're reflecting yourself in kind of basically your art and your creativity through games?
Yeah. This Heart Machine started as a very personal, entity for me. It was just me originally. And, it was focused on the story that I wanted to tell and the game that I wanted to make. And, I started collaborating pretty early on after I figured out I'm not great at programming / I don't really enjoy programming, and bringing somebody else in to either help teach me or take that over. And that was Bo Blythe, who was, the first person there with me to help build this out. And so it's kind of transformed a whole lot over time. Heart Machine as an entity, and kind of the games we make and the stories that we tell, from something that was very much my own thing to now spanning much larger team, where it's 40-ish whatever people. I can't give you the exact number off the top of my head, but we're plus 40 folks at this point on multiple projects. And the dynamics of things have to change, and kind of the mentality on things have to change when it comes to our storytelling, when it comes to the games we're making, to better accommodate all the different viewpoints that we have and kind of creativity that comes out of these spaces. So, you know, I'm fortunate to be surrounded by very talented and intelligent folks that have a lot to say and have a lot of good input and feedback. And, you know, I cannot do things alone. I've never really been able to do that. It's like kind of the whole thing with it is, even at the outset, even with Drifter itself, kind of the message in that game is it's impossible to take this stuff on yourself, really. And you always need that support network. You always need those people in your life, you know, whether it's through work, whether it's through, you know, personal relationships or otherwise. Like, I wouldn't have been able to like tell the stories that I wanted to tell at the start without other folks filling up, you know, without people collaborating, without people becoming a deep and meaningful part of Heart Machine. And so I'm just one of many now. Sure, I'm a creative director and whatever else, but ultimately I cannot do this alone, just as I would not be able to get through, you know, my own health problems alone. I've been fortunate to have a good support network there with friends and family to be there when, you know, I go to the hospital or have a procedure or, you know, am dying. So it's, you know, the important message to me and the important lesson to learn all the time, you know, in every aspect of life, but especially when it comes to work and the personal stuff they do, is like, you know, you really got to have those folks in your life that are going to be there for you and that are going to really help support you in the things that, you know, need to get done, or support you in dire times. And that's the most meaningful and important stuff to me, are those relationships, those dynamics, whether it be in the work or whether it be, you know, on the personal side.
Yeah, and you know, talking about the stories you're creating and have a lot of people help you tell those stories. One of the things I found the most striking, because I love playing video games that have a story. That's like my number one driving factor is what is the story. And I was struck the fact that there's basically no text or dialogue in the entire game. It's told through you get some, you know, series of photos and really, besides some other secrets that I've yet to uncover, because there's tons of secrets in the game. I feel like I've only scratched the surface. It's really, you do meet people on the journey, but it's just pictures and memories. So we're you know, kind of talk about the decision behind going in that creative direction to tell a story when traditionally we see, you know, just dialogue, spoken or text or otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the kind of wordless storytelling or visual storytelling stems a lot from, you know, animation and other mediums that I've loved. And, you know, that one of you know, the original members on Heart Machine, Casey Hunt, he and I had worked together on a few different things in the past, projects that we wanted to bring to fruition but didn't come to pass. Like, we really loved visual storytelling. We really loved wordless storytelling, and we had like this short animated bit that we were doing together for a while, and figuring out you know, how that would work in that format, and trying to take lessons we learned from other things like Studio Ghibli stuff, or other great like master storytellers who do a lot with expression and do a lot with world building and do a lot with again, action to tell these stories, where it translates across any language, you know, because it's all universal. And so really, and further being inspired by, you know, games like Journey at the time that showcase that, hey, you can still have a very meaningful and impactful experience without a single word of dialogue being told there. And so that's kind of what we were more riffing on, was those different mediums, whether it be TV, film, or again, in games especially, that started to become a more prominent feature of storytelling. Because ultimately, the thing that I think we loved about visual storytelling, and especially for Drifter, is that what people imagine is going to be more impactful than what we tell them in a lot of ways. It's sort of like scary movies where, you know, as soon as you show the monster in like full light and all that, you ruin some of the mystery, because it's a very personal thing for what every individual is like scared of, or what they, you know, resonate with. And so it's always going to be spookier to like keep that more of a mystery, because what you imagine is going to be much more impactful to you than, you know, what's presented to you on screen. And so it's that similar mentality of, people really make these stories, and for Drifter in particular, is fascinating to watch people lay out what their interpretation of it was, and to see like how many things they like nailed, or how many things were like so different than like what we had thought we'd like clearly laid out. And it's like, you know, that's the joy of it. That's what you got to embrace, is that people aren't going to like perfectly interpret this, and you shouldn't want them to either. Like, embrace what the format is and enjoy that. And again, people will pull from it what they will, metaphorically or otherwise, and that's amazing. You know, to read those stories and to see what resonates with them, and to see what their interpretation is, and to see how much like layers on what we were doing and what we were thinking, and what like feeds into what they're thinking, and then it makes a much more personal experience for the person playing it, rather than, you know, just seeing text like, this is the fact of this world, and this is, and it's like that kind of ambiguity gives you that personal ownership. That's a really cool part of, you know, wordless or visual storytelling.
Yeah, and I loved it. And to your point, I know there's a lot of you reflected, but you know, I've had more struggles with mental than physical health, and a lot of what I felt through the Drifter was that mental anguish and everything, especially when you had the scenes of black rain coming down. Yes, you saw that there was physical pain with him too, but there was also a mental side there. Just incredible storytelling overall. I loved it. And like to switch over to Solar Ash, which was really, you know, even though the themes were similar, like it's this dark sci-fi, you know, kind of space age, apocalyptic type themes in there, but it's a radically different game in there. Not only was there a move to 3D, you know, you had other elements of moving quickly and speed. So when creating the game and really creating what felt like a completely different vision, even to the storytelling, having traditional dialogue as well, how did you approach that, and what was the concept of, here's what we'd like to do with Solar Ash, and telling the story of Ray and a planet in danger?
I mean, Solar was from the early days, I knew that I wanted to do some actual verbal storytelling. I wanted to have some actual dialogue and characters to really dig into, because, you know, Drifter, there were certainly characters and, you know, ones that fan favorites and whatever else, but really wanted to dig into those elements and have that expressivity go further. And, you know, we started out with text, and later on in production, it became more clear, and became, you know, like our publisher was like, hey, you know, maybe you should do VO for this, because that's really going to elevate things. And it did. And it was tough. And it was a, you know, because it was added in much later in the process, and we'd never done VO for. So like anything that you haven't done before is going to be a bit of a daunting challenge, but you know, the end result literally speaks for itself. But I you know, I really enjoyed what we got out of those performances, and I really enjoyed, you know, what we were able to express differently in Solar Ash, which, the intention there with that story was to be more broadly encompassing. You know, it wasn't anywhere near as like personal as the one in Drifter, which is very much about kind of, again, my own maladies and things like that. But Solar Ash is kind of speaking to broader themes of trauma, and you know, trying to connect in a broader way, and feeling like, okay, well, there are things that we want to express more explicitly. There are elements of this that, you know, we want to like have a finer and more granular way of showcasing, and we don't want to leave ambiguity in this part, or we don't want to leave ambiguity there. And so that requires those elements of dialogue and, you know, written lore, and, you know, that expression through voice acting, and kind of knew that going in, that again, if we wanted to speak to some broader themes, but more carefully, it would require that text.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that also stood out to me, and actually it stood out when my kid came in watching, he seen me playing on this, is like, oh, what's this? And he was just engrossed because you have Ray flying around doing all these super cool things. And it reminded me a little bit of Drifter, only in the sense that, you know, combat also had these simple controls, but once you mastered, it started looking a heck of a lot cooler on screen. So when you're going to like combat type style, or really the platforming, because the game has all kinds of different genres very well melded together, when you do something like that, you're like, we want to make it look as cool as possible, or do we want to make it easy to control? Kind of, how do you make those different decisions within the game?
I mean, with a lot of careful consideration, basically. You know, it's always a balancing act, because you know, I certainly want to make games that a lot of people can enjoy, that, you know, are more accessible. And so whether it be like a difficulty level, or whether it be just balancing the game overall, or letting the players kind of self-balance in some way or another. But Solar was always going to be a little tougher in that respect, because it requires camera control. So that is already, like, you know, third-person camera controls is tough for some folks, you know, for a variety of reasons. And so that already kind of limits some of the accessibility. But then on top of that, you know, you're dealing with very high speeds, and you're dealing with these anti-gravity elements on these big giant creatures. And so all of that ends up becoming, and kind of fine-tuning the platforming also, all that ends up being, you know, more challenging overall, because of the because of basically the framework of the game that we built itself. And so it was a long balancing act of fine-tuning over and over and over again these experiences of like, what's going to reach that good middle ground of like, it's not too easy, but it's not too hard. It's going to like challenge people, but also, you know, allow other folks that are new to this to get into it and not feel totally out of place or completely, you know, walled off. And so, you know, we do have some adjustment there on difficulty also, because it's like, yeah, timing is like kind of the core component of Solar. And so just even giving people more time, you know, at those difficulty levels, and saying like, oh, you get more seconds here. And we try to default to what we thought the happy medium was, and say like, yeah, but if you want to make it easier, if you want to make it harder, go ahead. So I feel like in any games that we produce, you know, previously or you know, in the future, that accessibility is important, and you do your best to tune to what you think it should be, generally speaking. But I also think that it's impossible to tune for everybody, so why not offer other options for folks?
Yeah, and the difficulty, I mean, of both games, it definitely, you got punished if you made mistakes, but it was something to where it was a repeatable thing that you could quickly jump back in. So if anybody is listening, I will, or for those that are listening, rather, definitely good challenges to do in there. And speaking of challenges, the next one for you is going to be Hyperlight Breaker, going to be 3D, much like Solar Ash. Currently at No Clip on YouTube, going through the development of the game, giving people an inside look. But what can you tell us about what you're wanting to do in Breaker? Obviously, you're going back to the Hyperlight universe. It's going to have some 3D elements. But what should people expect from this sequel?
Yeah, I think they can expect that we'll have a lot of connective tissue to Drifter. You know, it's not a direct sequel, as in like the next game in that storyline, but it feeds into the broader story of the world, and so it's expanding the franchise. It's, you know, giving more depth to it, and ultimately it's allowing us to express some different desires on like gameplay and design for this multiplayer format, for a far more replayable experience, and still tapping into elements that we feel like we really enjoyed executing on for both, you know, Solar Ash and Drifter originally, with our visual storytelling, but also integrating in, you know, actual words and things like that too. So it'll be a blending of a lot of lessons learned on Solar and a lot of lessons learned on Drifter, and kind of an infusion of those things, and bringing, you know, we hope, a very engaging and long form and new experience to players that still isn't a world that they're familiar with.
Well, fantastic. I know I'm looking forward to it. I got it wish list on Steam. Highly recommend everybody here at MiracleCon does it as well.
Please do.
But yes, but to close out, Alex, you are going to, your message right now is reaching out to a group of gamers of all kinds, whether they be tabletop, video game, all have the same passion of doing good for children's health. Do you have any message that you'd like to give to the MiracleCon audience before we depart?
Gosh, I mean, there's plenty of messages, but I think more relevant is doing whatever you can to support the people in your life that are struggling through whether it be physical or mental health challenges or any challenges at all. Like kind of tapping into the original thing that we were talking about is like that support network is really important for people going through challenging times, for people with whatever conditions it may be, to ease that suffering, to really help them through, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what makes living really meaningful, is making those connections, those bonds, and knowing that people love you and care for you. And so, whatever you can do to support folks in your life closely, that are suffering, that are hurting, and whatever you can do for people that you don't even know, it can underscore enough just how much that can be an impact, even for complete strangers, just to know that somebody cares about you when people are going through really difficult times. So any kind of support you feel like you can do is going to be valuable and is going to be worthwhile.
Well, Alex, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to help us kick off MiracleCon. Thank you so much for your art and your games. They're incredible playthroughs, and we will come over to the Gaming for Good panel later this afternoon because we will be giving away some keys for the Heart Machine games. Alex, again, thank you so much for your time, and best of luck on Hyper Light Breaker. Can't wait to see it.
Thanks for having me.